That's
Tim
it.
Noonan, how are you, my friend?
Hey, mate. Thanks for having me on the show.
Mate, it's a pleasure. I love that we get to sit here and chat. We've just been having a great chat off camera. But I grew up with my old man, which has actually been a bit similar for a couple of the recent guests. There have been people that at a stage of my life, I was binge watching on telly and loving what they do. You're a documentary filmmaker, and I fell in love with your series, Boy to Man, and the adventures that you were on and the rites of passage that you were experiencing to be classified as a man in these different tribes from around the world. But mate, I have to ask you, where does the sense of adventure come from?
Look, I grew up in Tasmania. Like, it felt like a really small, isolated, insular place. 20 years ago when I'd left, more than that now. Um, and I guess I was desperate to get out, and I wanted to design a way always where I could travel the world and fill up my life with the most extreme experiences from all different gamuts of emotions, um, so that I felt like I really lived. I don't quite know where that came from. I mean, I was a journalist and a reporter for years, and I did a lot of stories on hard luck stories and inspirational stories. Um, Human interest stuff that really made me realize that life's short and it can change really quickly. And I guess I was trying to learn as much from these stories. One of them in particular actually was on a little kid with cystic fibrosis, Cohen Ashton. I don't know if you're aware of Cohen.
I do know Colin,
Yeah.
know his
And
family.
yeah. And so, it was those sort of really brave people in really extraordinary circumstances that taught me that I needed to grab the bull by the horns and try to pack my life full of life-changing um, moments. So when I was on my deathbed at the end of my life, I could look back and go, yeah, I made the most of it. So, I mean, is that do you have that sense from cystic fibrosis? Did that make you want to seize the day?
Yes, yes, but it took a little while. I think as a kid, because I was so well and I was so blessed to have incredible health with my CF early on, I had a medical record that was thick, and there were a lot of papers in my medical file that said I had all of these issues, and I was taking 30 to 50 tablets a day as a kid. So I knew that I had cystic fibrosis and it registered, but I was so fit and healthy that I didn't feel like my life would be any shorter or any less extraordinary than the average or normal person, for lack of a better term. And it wasn't really until I started to experience some of the challenges of CF, come sort of 18 years of age, where my lungs were progressively getting worse. And I guess that, when people talk about cystic fibrosis and doctors talk about the lung disease, they say it's progressive and degenerative. And, I started to experience what progressive and degenerative felt like and meant for someone with cystic fibrosis. And that was kind of a 6-year window where my mortality was something I started to understand. And I think it was almost a switch in my psyche, and maybe a negative switch at first, where I still remain relatively positive and relatively forward striving in trying to make progress and improve things. But I felt like it just started to sort of knock away at me a little bit, where I felt like my life maybe was going to be shorter and these challenges were going to be more consistent. And there was almost like a new lower baseline of normal. And it wasn't until I really took ownership of that and was like, no, I'm going to change this, because this isn't the belief I had as a young man. And I always say that my parents granted me the most incredible gift and lesson in, the early years of my life, where they just taught me what you believe is what you become, by the way that they defied absolutely every prognosis and diagnosis that was given to me in my early years around a shorter life and a more challenging life. They just encouraged me to believe that anything was possible. And I took that belief back on board again and started to strive towards the kind of life that I wanted to live, recognizing that certainly I don't believe my life will be any shorter, but nobody has any control over life expectancy or the amount of years that they get on earth. And I really feel like this podcast was one of the first examples of that, started to pursue things that allowed me to feel not just as though I existed, but as though I was alive. And that for me was like a shift that started at the age of 24 and something that's really ingrained in me now at 28, where I'm, we've had an amazing chat off camera just about some of the blessings and joys of life and love and partnership and family and those things that you want to strive towards to feel as though you're maximizing and living your life. And I just find it fascinating to riff with that and connect with other people on what those sliding door moments are for them
Yeah.
and where that motivation comes from and where it lies at the current, because we all experience these tragedies and reminders in life, right? That we're not going to be here forever. And sometimes it's a hard realization when it's someone close to you that you lose, or, or maybe you're experiencing that, I guess, that slippery slope of a progressive health problem in your own life. But I love that you've really like personified what it means to live an adventure. And do you think that your work as a journalist and that encouragement to ask the questions of life
Yeah.
led you on the kind of adventures that you've been on?
Yeah, it just made me really take stock and understand like how lucky I was to be, fit and healthy, and like I guess I just wanted to make sure that I didn't take that for granted. And like the thing about an adventure, like it sounds kind of cliched, but we all dream about it. And it's when you embark on something that you're kind of you're scared of, and you head out the door into the unknown, you leave your home behind, and you go on a journey, and you've got a quest in mind, you've got something that you want to overcome, not just like a hapless tourist adventure, but I mean, it can be a rite of passage, of course, to want to go on a gap year and head out and see if you can survive overseas by yourself for the first time. But what I was trying to do, I guess, and I've made something like 23-hour-long docos now of this kind, where you go a place for a month with a specific goal, and for mine, I do it through TV shows. So I've made one show about what it means to be a man, and so like I try to go and survive a different extreme ritual in the most exotic and extreme place that I could possibly find. And then my wife and I did a whole series for Netflix called Extreme Engagement, where we did marriage rituals, and we did 8 of those around the world. And I discovered that when I spent enough time in a location gearing up to an event that I thought was impossible, like breaking in a horse and like having never ridden a horse before, or doing something like riding on the back of a bull, or like something extreme that you would go, I could never possibly do that in my wildest dreams, or overcoming something together with your partner in like, oh my God, we did so many of them now, so many different marriage rituals around the world. But like, I feel like when you set yourself a deliberate task and you go and face your fears, on the other, it's always going to be difficult. But I realize that you can pretty much do anything you set your mind to. Like there's always a way. And I think I found that when I lived on an adventure for a certain period of time, like a month, it would give me the space to really have that sense of transformation. And without a doubt, once I'd done the ritual or event that I was scared of, I'd always be legitimately transformed. And I'd come back with this new sense of confidence and sense of strength that I never thought that I had. And so it did work. And so that's why I kept doing it, because I just got such a kick out of putting myself out of my comfort zone, doing something I never thought I could, and then coming back with like some message, universal message that I could share with other people through these TV shows that I was making. So yeah,
Let
it's
me ask you a
interesting.
question, Tim. Something that, like a question that's really coming to the surface for me now is when you watch these rituals, and I've watched much of the series that you've done, and I'm yet to watch the marriage one, which I'm excited for. It probably very timely for Soph and I to dive in and watch
Yeah,
some of those
yeah.
adventures that you and PJ have been on. But I wonder, when you think, whether it be marriage rituals, the rituals of manhood that you experienced on the first series, how do you define ritual? Because I would think that, I was at a wedding yesterday, and in some ways it's a ritual, but it seems that there's quite a contrast between Eastern and Western rituals, for lack of a better term. I'm interested to see how you would define it.
Well, we've become so, like, I guess, we live in quite a cotton wool society now, where we're so protected and we don't really want to go through adversity and we don't really want to face extreme challenges. And we sort of, I feel like we shy away from those things and we're trying to make it as easy as we can for ourselves. Whereas if you go into like tribal communities around the world that still have and hold these ceremonies and rituals of like the rites of passage of life, they are transformative and they are a lot more arduous. They always have this like, they have this period, this time in a like a tribal ritual, especially like this thing that that the boogeyman's going to get you. Like you always feel like you're going to be a goner when you go into one of these rites of passage, and you're taken away and you're removed from society, and you go on an adventure with the tribal people. Like for manhood, it's like you go away with all the men, and they paint this picture of doom, like you're going to come back changed, and you're scared of it, and that like rears its head in all kinds of different forms. Like I did this one ritual in Brazil where the whole idea is that they exhaust you for like 10 days straight and like put you into cold water and just like keep you awake and put you like through this extreme marathons running with logs on your shoulder, and you have to dance through the heat of the day, and like they wear you down and wear you down with the idea that by the end you'll have a sort of a hallucination. They give you this, they blow this drug up your nose, and the idea is that you sort of pass out and have this hallucination of your future. And everyone's scared of it, but then you go through it and it's fine. And you realize that actually your own worst enemy. And in the end, you get taken back into the village and you've got a new name and you've got a new sense of self and everyone looks at you differently. And I feel like today, we don't really have that. We've got it in watered down forms. It's the gap year. It's getting your driver's license. It's going out and getting blind drunk and surviving, drinking a six pack when you're 18. But it's not quite the same as like these very structured rites of passage that have existed for thousands and thousands of years and evolved in these communities, tribal communities. And I just became fascinated by that because it did work. I didn't grow up with my dad around. Mum and dad split up when they were young. And so I never felt like, I guess I was man enough. I learned a lot of my life lessons from mum, just purely through distance. And so I innately felt like I needed to do something to feel like I could rough it up, to feel like, I was more of that stereotypical man. I mean, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but it was for me. It was just, that's how I felt. Like I felt like I was missing something. And so I went on this big quest to try to overcome that. And then, I did. And I got to a point where I felt like I don't really have anything to prove to anyone anymore. And so that was liberating. So it did work. And it was because we used, I went through these very structured rites of passage all around the world where I just continually face fears. And I think, I feel like we are missing that now.
It's almost like the ultimate lesson in anti-fragility, isn't it? Like, and this is I guess a term or an idea that was coined by Tom Nash for me. Who's an incredible guy. He's got a great story, survived meningococcal, and he's got now like hooks for arms, like pirate hooks.
Wow.
And he wrote a great book called Hook, Line and Sinner. A very interesting guy and has a great way of articulating ideas and thoughts. And he shared with me the concept of thinking more so about anti-fragility than resilience. And he said, we don't have to run a series of tests to figure out that a glass is fragile. If you knock it over, it will shatter. I did this yesterday. Shatters everywhere. It's not very resilient at all. He said if you took a rock and you dropped it and you beat the rock and you put force on it, some things will change, but ultimately the rock will stay the same. It's quite resilient. He said, but if you think in terms of the musculoskeletal system, it can be put under tension and under force, and the fibers will tear away but grow back stronger. They're anti-fragile. And I almost think that if I look from my outsider's perspective, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts here, if I look at those rituals, they are, in a sense, putting you through a period of struggle and wear down and challenge for you to come out the other side stronger. And that is almost the lesson, that manhood is the recognition that you can go through challenges and still stand on your own 2 feet and know that you're capable.
100%. It's all about learning that you've got like an inner strength inside, and it's just working out how to unlock that, and take people through the process, because everyone's, capable of so much more than they give themselves credit for. Um, and, like I've often thought, like, wouldn't it be good to hold rites of passage for people here in Australia, for young people? But yeah, it's definitely something that's I've always thought about. But then all of a sudden you move into a different stage of life, and other things. Like, I'm a filmmaker, so that's what I do, and I guess I just have to keep yeah learning through making films. There's an interesting thing about like recording the process too, because I don't know if you felt like this, like you're doing a podcast, and once it's, you're putting yourself out there and you're telling your personal stories and you're exposing all the dirty laundry and your deepest, darkest fears. And by doing that, there's a release in it, because you're becoming more confident and more comfortable with who you are. And there's something so cool about recording your own transformation. Because I've made documentaries, scores of them, about other people, and I've spent a lifetime, as I said, like a decade being a journalist and filming other people's stories. But you're always looking through a viewfinder, and you're sort of learning the lessons like through other people, but you're not getting that firsthand life-changing experience. And I found that when I recorded, like went on an adventure to face my fears, and I turned the camera back on myself, I had nowhere to go, I had nowhere to hide. And once it was on air, that was it. Like, whether I liked who I was or I didn't like who I was, that was a period in time. And you force yourself to be cool with you. And that's the release that I got. And I don't know if you feel like that, like saying all the stuff that you say and exposing yourself like you are. It's like almost therapeutic. Do you find that?
Yeah, I do. And I think about the 4th episode of my podcast, as any podcaster experiences, even years into the journey, is when you're not prepared, you sometimes find yourself without a guest. And I remember 4th episode, I had a guest reschedule on me and I hadn't had anything banked. It was so early on. And for the first time in my life, I considered the idea of publicly sharing my story. And it wasn't that people didn't know that I had cystic fibrosis. I took physical tablets like at multiple stages throughout the day. So it was obvious that I was experiencing life a little bit differently to other people through my health. But it was the first time I decided I'm going to try and articulate how I feel about this and share it outside of my immediate circle or without any questions on me. I'm just going to speak on it. And mate, I found it so challenging to articulate how I felt about it. I found it incredibly different to sit there and speak about this without being probed. I found it quite emotional. Found myself stumbling over words, worrying about how people would perceive it and listen to it on the other side. And you're right, it's so revealing. And I remember sitting there and listening to that episode back with my family, because it was quite emotional, speaking about the incredibly positive impact that they've had on me. And then some of my fears around what being really honest and speaking truthfully on some of my fears around cystic fibrosis would do to them and how they would feel about that emotionally. It was just very vulnerable and raw. And in listening to it back, I'm like, oh, I wish I articulated that better, or I wish I didn't stumble and say or are and, have all those pauses in speech. But then you become comfortable with repetition that, okay, this is my experience of life. And whilst I can look back on it now and go, I know how to articulate that thing that I was trying to explain, that feeling I didn't quite have words for, to me, that's now an easier conversation to have. But I think there's merit in, for anybody, whether it be through the means of a podcast and a microphone, or like yourself, a camera, or, maybe like a notepad and a journal for somebody, to try and articulate what you're feeling and experiencing. Sometimes allows you the freedom of dumping it out of your mind, being able to look at it back and understand what the words are saying to you. And yeah, so revealing, but I think so rewarding when you can lean into that. And just, I think one of the things that's been a reminder for me is even in the efforts to articulate it and have conversations about different feelings or experiences of life, don't stop living life. It's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to go out and physically do things and physically challenge yourself and be in the act of living life. And I think sometimes we forget that. Like, how many of us use television or media to experience things like adventure? Like, I can sit there and watch Boy to Man and learn lessons from it and have tangible takeaways. But it's different to being Tim Noonan, who's living it and breathing it and is getting the physical rewards of being in that passage of his life. And I think it'd be an interesting question to ask you through your physical experiences there on Boy to Man and getting that rite of passage. And as you used a great word, unlocking that recognition of your capabilities and your anti-fragility. Are there still stages of your life post that series and, even to the current, where that question of, am I man enough? Am I a man?
Oh yeah.
Does that still pop up?
No. No. It just changed. It obviously just changes form because like now, I'm a dad. I've got a young 4-year-old son and another one on the way. My wife's about to give birth in like about a week's time. So it's like now fatherhood's like kind of like I certainly wouldn't encourage my sons to go and do the crazy, manhood rituals that I've done, which is ironic. And I don't know how I'm going to navigate that, as they get older or, but I guess I'm just feeling through that rite of passage now of fatherhood. But like, I definitely feel like because I went through so many rites of passage, manhood rituals, that I feel like I came back after traveling the world and I was like, did I really need to do all of that to like prove to myself that I was a man? And like, of course, not really. Like I could have done it through a lot of the right therapy, probably. Think. I mean, I think I don't know. It's like that's that sliding door moment. I don't know, but I definitely feel like I overcome. I definitely feel like I overcame this feeling that I wasn't a man, and whether or not I could have done that at home. I mean, I don't know. I guess the jury's out. Like, I'll never know. But it definitely did. I definitely came back feeling transformed. I don't feel like I have anything more to prove. Um, so I guess in that sense, I would say like if you feel like you're missing something, then it is worth like going on an adventure to try to get rid of that, like, or try to grow. And that can be anything. Like it doesn't have to be like you don't have to go and do crazy wild stuff. Like hitting wasp nests and jumping on the back of bulls and all the rest of the nuts things that I've done. But like if you can, like I know, for example, like my wife and I, when we were trying to have kids, we didn't think we would be able to because PJ had pretty severe endometriosis, and so we set out to go and document like a whole bunch ourselves going through a whole bunch of fertility rituals to try to work out whether or not we should go through IVF. And at the end of it, we were going to make a decision. And like, that's a softer way. Like we had a question, like, should we go through IVF or not? Are we cool with having kids or not? Let's go on an adventure to find out. And we literally took off. We were planning to do it through a network in the US, and film it all. And then on our first like test pilot episode, we found out we were pregnant. And I feel like it was the universe that just said, okay, I know you're going to go through this. I know you're going to be cool with not having kids either way. But we found out we were pregnant, and then we were like, okay, well, I guess we'll come home then. That series is over. Um, but yeah, it's kind of like you get, as you said before, you get what you, sometimes you always get what you need. You don't always necessarily get what you want. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like, it's going to sound crazy, but what's the best thing that you've learned from having cystic fibrosis? Or what's the best thing about having cystic fibrosis?
I've always said, and I maintain this, that CF is a blessing. Like, it's been a big blessing and a great teacher. I think there's probably two key things that I think of when you ask that. The first being the closeness and depth of my connections to family
Mm.
is incredible. I think that, my parents have been divorced for, God, I always say 13 years, but I actually think it's 15. I've been saying 13 years for the last two. It's like 15 years now, but they're still incredible mates. We still have an incredible connection as a family because I think a big reason, like my health, when you value life the way that we do because of this experience, and, my sister values life incredibly, and we're very close because, like, when you've got a brother with CF, and when you've got a son with CF, and for Soph, when you've got a partner who understands mortality a little differently, and especially when CF, being the kind of disease that it is, unfortunately is so crippling for so many people and has really robbed people of a lot of years of their life, you have a point number two, greater appreciation for life. And I just feel so blessed, mate, to have the opportunity to live. It's, for me, the most tangible metaphor for that has been like through the marathon stuff that we did the last couple of years and the charity events where, my lungs were bleeding and I was running the marathons to try and prove to people with cystic fibrosis, but mostly to prove to myself what I was still capable of and that I wasn't limited or defined by the condition. And when you're out there and you're choosing to suffer, but you know that the exact time that you're choosing to suffer and push through the wall that you hit at 35K or 30K, whatever it is in the race, and you've still got a distance to go, like, this is chosen suffering. I know right now that there's a kid with cystic fibrosis who's in a hospital bed and they're fighting for their life and they're suffering, and that is not a choice. And so I think it's given me just incredible perspective towards these things in life that allow me to be the man that I am. Like, I'm confident I wouldn't be the same human being had I not have experienced these challenges. And heard Jimmy Carr on a podcast a couple months back. He just said, can't have an easy life and a great character. And that just resonated, right? Like, I still think that there's so much depth to my character that I'm yet to unlock. And I still believe that character is something that you can ultimately build on and learn more about and encourage yourself into growth there. But mate, I love life and I want more life. And, I want to be enthusiastic about existence and push boundaries and have new experiences. But mate, probably the challenge is it's made it really hard for me to, like my career at the moment, my quote unquote 9 to 5 is, I wish it was 9 to 5 sometimes, is real estate. And it's really hard for me to sit in a real estate office and be excited about what I'm doing because I just feel that life has given me a certain experience to go and get more from it. And I don't know if that makes sense when I say that, but I feel as though, for everything that I've been challenged by and for the experience that I've had, I'm here to do something that is less ordinary and to share these kind of messages with people. And like, I'd see my purpose as, uplifting and inspiring hope in others through story, whether that be a guest who's coming on the podcast and their story, or whether that be my story as it develops and, as I add years to it. I really want to help people unlock what it is that has allowed me to, really squeeze the juice out of life and experience it the way that I have. And I think in a similar way, CF or not, we're all trying to do that in our own lives, right?
Well, I mean, I guess so, but a lot of people aren't as conscious of it as you. Like, because you've been through that, it feels like what an immense gift. I mean, I know, like, I don't have it, and I haven't, haven't had your experience, but we work so hard to have those moments where life stops for a second and you have pure appreciation, and they're so far and few in between for so many people. And so, like, to have that constantly, that constant reminder that, what, life is fragile and we're only here for a very short time. And there's a big world out there and there's a lot of experiences like to have. Why wouldn't we want to milk the shit out of it? Like, why wouldn't we want to fill our life up with this and be so appreciative and be present? And so, like, Yeah, I feel fine like when I listen to you, even though you've faced crazy adversity, it feels like you've got so much more in other like areas of your life where you like you've unlocked this, in super strength to be present that so many people don't have. It's insane. I wish I could have that more.
I still struggle with it. I think everybody does it at some level, right? Because life gets so busy. And I,
Yeah.
I feel like I almost find myself at times where there's a lot on my plate and I'm trying to solve this problem and trying to solve the next problem and I'm trying to advance my career and I'm trying to advance my health. And there's all these goals that we have and we add layers to the to-do list as humans. Like we're always trying to do so much at one given time. And then I feel myself getting stressed about the fact that I'm not as present as I'd like to be, or not in a space of gratitude and appreciation like I normally would be at a baseline. And I have to remind myself to kind of stop and be calm and think about it and be really present in it. I think it's such a battle all the time. Like you're in and out of that
Mm.
space of presence and gratitude because of how busy life is. And that's one of the things that I recognize as I think it's the challenge of the current human condition with social media and how plugged in we are, is that it's really hard to plug out and be present. Do you experience that in your work?
Yeah, like so. I guess chose to become a doco filmmaker and a journalist because it allowed me like the lens allowed me this passport into other people's worlds, like you doing your podcast, to try to get those life lessons so I could stand on the shoulders of other people and try to live the most fulfilling life that I possibly could. And yeah, I guess that like it's been a blessing to do what I do because I get to meet people like you and it's like even having a conversation like this, it just forces you to be present and have that moment of gratitude that we all miss because the game of life gets, as you said, really busy and you focus on things that aren't really all that important and we have ultimately like we're just battling ourselves, so we're battling our own perceptions constantly. So
Let me ask you this, Tim. I was walking to get a coffee the other day and I had a random question that just come to the forefront of my mind. And I thought, if I could observe myself as an outsider, what observations would I make about the way that I live my life? And what assumptions would I make? And you've almost had the opportunity to do that through the lens where you're filming yourself and you're in that space of documentary or making a film. What is the lesson that you learn when you watch it back? And what's the difference between the way that you perceive it in the act of doing it and the way that it comes across when you watch it on film?
whoa, it's a deep question. That's a great question. Think like I don't know, like I mean, I'm constantly asking myself, that eternal question of what's the meaning of all of this, and I feel like ultimately, I mean, it comes down to family, like for me anyway, and that experience of feeling like, I guess, love, trying to get that feeling of love. It's as corny as that sounds for yourself, for other people, um, and balancing out, like controlling the mind and being present. And I think I guess I've used filmmaking to be like, to set myself a goal to overcome something that I felt like I was lacking or something that I was scared about. And I've used it to facilitate, big adventures, to go on big journeys of transformation. And when I've returned, like I'll always, I barely watch anything that I've produced after I've finished it. Like I haven't watched Boy to Man for years. I mean, it would be pretty nostalgic to me now to go back and have a look. Be interesting to see what I thought of myself back then. I would have thought I was like a babe in the woods, like super junior, and I'd be probably really embarrassed. But yeah, it's but I got the lessons I needed to get from making those films or going through those experiences. So I guess I can just move on. Like I don't really
Mm.
look, I don't spend too much time looking back. because I love what I do. And I think like that's, like exploring the gamut of what it means to be alive is what gets me off, or gets me out of bed. And if you can find something that you love to do, like, so you're following your bliss, like, then, you've struck gold. Like, you'll never work another day in your life. And that's why I wanted to, like, I guess, double down and follow filmmaking, because I didn't feel like it was work for me. And I sometimes I'll always try to like encourage other people, if they really love uh, doing something that they're passionate about, like, throw it all in and like try your hardest to make it work. And it sounds like you're doing that. Like, you know, you have waged a lot to make this podcast as good as it is. And yeah, it's awesome. I've got a question for you.
You're such a journalist, aren't you? I love how you, like, you're similar to me. I love, this is really fun. It's like a game of question tennis. I hit you with something and then I can see the curiosity in you. This is fun.
Well, I want to interview you. It's frustrating for me, actually, because like, in a way it sounds nuts, but in a way, like, I'm jealous of those lessons that you've learned having CF. It's super inspiring. Feel like it's, um, and you're talking off camera earlier about, if you were to have kids, together with Soph, we were talking about IVF, and forgive me if you don't want to go there.
I'm very comfortable.
you're
I've spoken
cool?
about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, if you found out that you could choose between having a cystic fibrosis baby or not, like, that'd be a tough decision for you, wouldn't it? Like, because you'd probably be going, well, hey, I wouldn't be me without cystic fibrosis.
Mm.
So it's a tough decision, right? Like, how would you feel if you had to make a choice?
It's a big question. I think if the choice was to have a child with CF or not at all, to not get to experience that, I would say that I think it's easier in theory than it would be in
Yeah.
practice
Yeah.
to say that my life has been nothing short of incredible and my experiences are so worthy and so worthwhile of all the challenges that I've had to face to have them and to experience life, that I would certainly not have any reservations to bringing a child into the world with CF. I think probably selfishly, my bigger challenge would be, with CF, one of the weirdest things about cystic fibrosis is that there is the risk of cross-infection between CF patient to CF patient. I've actually never watched it, but there's a relatively famous movie called 6 Feet Apart. Cole Sprouse, I think it is, who's one of those twins. That was a Disney Channel guy back in the day, was sort of the lead in this film about two people in hospital who fall in love with CF. And because of their disease, they're kept 6 feet apart at all times because there are certain lung infections and bugs in the lungs that are particularly dangerous to other people with CF, but wouldn't challenge the regular population. And one of the things that I've always thought about is, I want to be a dad so badly because I have such a great relationship with my parents. And, we spoke about it before that, I can only think about it now and sort of try to imagine what it will be like, but that joy of bringing life into the world and knowing that they are a reflection of you and the person you love so much. And, the fact that you get to impart lessons on them and watch them on their journey. And like, that really does excite me. And I would be terrified though that my health and my challenges could hurt my little one. And the fact that, because, I lived without some of the modern drugs that we have that have made CF far more manageable. One drug in particular called Trikafta that has really improved the quality of life and the stability of life with CF. And for example, for the 2 years that I've had access to this drug, or 2 and a bit years now, I haven't had a lung bleed since, which is, an incredible result. This drug is just so effective. And because of it, I don't have thick, sticky mucus in my lungs anymore. So, life and breathing and running and all those things are far more manageable, although I managed them quite well before. But I think There is still 26 years of scarring on my lungs before the last two. There are still infections that have been in my lungs before because I didn't have access to drugs like this. And there may very well still be challenges ahead of me that I'm not aware of. And to think that I could bring a baby into this world and potentially harm them or create difficulty for them, that scares me, if I'm being honest. So that would make, I would hate to be a father, but feel like I have to be distant at times. And for a child not to understand that and to not be able to conceptualize that difference when they know their dad is around and present and their dad is like them. If a child was to have CF, it's like, well, dad, you're like me and you're fine. Why can't we be together right now? Would really hurt me. And I even think about that from the perspective of, my sister is a carrier of the CF gene, and there's potentially a chance that when her and her partner decide to have children, that there is that risk for them too. And I'd hate to be an uncle who could potentially damage a niece or a nephew. And so all of these things are, right now, they're just fears, and you try not to manifest any of that or struggle with that too much before the potential reality of that is here and we're facing it. But I think for the most part, my life has been extraordinary. Like, I wouldn't change anything about it. My parents wouldn't change anything about it. Certainly gave them a few more worries and headaches when I was young. But as I said before, I am the man I am because of it. So, what I certainly be looking to do is figure out how I could teach some of the lessons that I've learned through it to my children.
And that's the thing.
And
Do you get those lessons without going through the adversity and through the challenge? Like, can you just learn those lessons through, like, hearing it or watching a movie? I don't know. It's not the same, right? Like, you don't get that same resilience.
you'd be able to speak to this, though, that I think I've heard people say a lot that your children are a reflection of who you are as a person. And so, like, especially with a 4-year-old now, they're becoming their own little person, right? And you can start to see that personality comes to the surface, and they have their own little way of going about life, and their character really starts to shine, and they say funny things and they do things that you think, where did that come from, and how did they learn that? And it is ultimately a reflection of the two people they spend the most time with, their mum and dad, if they're blessed enough to have both in their life. And I think, can my presence be the lesson in the way that I show up in the face of those challenges? And it's hard for a child to fully conceptualize that when they don't understand what's happening. But as they get older, will they be able to see that, dad faces this kind of challenge or this kind of difficulty really well because of the life experience that he's had? And, so now I'm going to take the lesson from dad. I only hope so,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, it's a tough thing. You don't want to, like, have a kid that sort of looks up and says, "Oh, I have to beat my parents." I have to, if it's like young sons often look at their dads and they think, "Oh, like, I have to, copy them or be like beat them at something." Like, and I'd hate for my son to feel like he had to go off and prove himself. Um, but but it is the coolest experience ever, watching them evolve and having, like, it's, yeah, as I said before, it's just like constant, challenge and then love straight back at you all the time. I mean, I don't know, like, what do you reckon the question would be there with our son?
I think it would be, well, firstly, like, what, I asked that question before about if you could observe yourself and your daily actions, what observations or assumptions would you make?
Mm.
It's almost like the child is the perfect example of that question. It's the ultimate observation because all they're doing is watching you move through the world and trying to understand and conceptualize what's happening. Like,
Right.
and also it's a great question to ask. What have you learnt from parenthood and from fatherhood? What have you learned about yourself? What are you learning about the world that you didn't previously recognize?
Yeah, like, I guess being a parent, like just it brings everything about your character to the surface because you are passing on like all of your traits, good and bad, to your kids. Like often you can, like sometimes if you're carrying around a certain disposition because of your own fears, you can like, I grew up feeling after my parents divorced like it was kind of maybe my fault in a way. And so you live with this, for a long time I lived with this idea of, you know, but that I was a bad guy in some strange way. And if I hadn't, I guess, done a lot of work on that myself, then raising my son, it'd be very easy to slip those perceptions, like sort of impose them onto him.
Mm.
And I'm quite conscious of that now. Like I certainly don't want him to grow up feeling in any way like he's not good enough or less than. But then there's this other irony that that no matter what happens, you're always going to have some sort of negative perceptions, like that you're going to have some. There's no such thing as a person who's completely zen unless you're Buddha or like even monks, I'm sure, have like they're constantly working on refining their perceptions and overcoming them. Like, and so you're always going to have perceived trauma, no matter what you do. And perceived trauma, even if you go through something that's not like as hectic as cystic fibrosis, it's all in the mind. And some people like who grew up in, say, really wealthy families, they've got their own trauma because they feel like they can never be like as good as their parents. And so they have this huge inflated idea of like, I have to be more successful than their parents. And until they get over that, a lot of people like that I've met in that situation are kind of really desperately unhappy because they never feel good enough. And so you've got, I guess when I'm looking at my son, I'm kind of trying to always monitor. I wonder what his perceptions are forming. Like, I wonder, because like those formative years, those first 3 to 4 years, so much is sort of set in stone. It's like a tree of identity perceptions, and then you build on those. And unless you go through something which is like an inciting incident where you go through something quite traumatic and then that changes everything again. But then as you grow up, you have all these branches of perceptions that were formed when you were a kid, and they get stronger and stronger into bigger branches. And then before you know it, that's you, but that wasn't you when you were born. You didn't have all these perceptions. You didn't have all of this loaded idea of what the world is. And you didn't have these fears. You were a babe, so I think
Let me ask him.
part of the journey is to try to chip away at those and realize they're just thoughts. They're not real. And that's the biggest thing that I've, my partner and I've learned is like realizing that basically you're built on a bunch of stories, and you just want to make sure that you buy into the stories that work for you and not the ones that are fictitious, because you can have beliefs about people and about yourself, but they're not real. They're just stories. And I'm watching my son, and I'm watching him grow, and I'm thinking, how do I help best guide him through as I see him? I mean, it's impossible to know exactly what he thinks, but like as I see him form what we think are his perceptions, are they really working for him? And I can't wait till he gets a bit older and I can start to teach him lessons that we've learned in order to like combat those. So, he doesn't get in a position where he feels, like where his identity's so set and he has negative perceptions of himself, because it's a waste of life. It's a waste of time. You can spend your whole life like living in shitty thoughts that don't help you. And I think actually, I think that's part of why, going on adventures and putting yourself into situations that you're scared of can be so empowering, because you can, you can deliberately go after attacking beliefs that aren't serving you and overcome them in a finite period of time. And that's a really cool thing to do, because if you don't, I feel like you can either choose to like better yourself and choose the challenges for your own life, creating a podcast, going and making a documentary series if it's, me, or, going and climbing Mount Everest or whatever you want to do, right? But if you can either choose those challenges, and I've noticed over the years that if I have set myself like some extreme challenges that are going to be in my value set, and they're going to, like, I'm doing something I love, I never get challenges that come from external places that I don't want. Like, I don't get unnecessary bills. I don't get, like speeding fines or whatever it might be that, like, or, people breaking up with you, or like tragedy in the family or anything like that. But when you sit idle and you're not doing what you love, and you're just wasting your time on social media, and you're not choosing your challenges, I feel like they come to you. So the universe, anyway, this is how I feel. I feel like the universe is always trying to teach you lessons, whether you like it or not. And it's up to you to, if you choose to set your own, they don't, unnecessary ones don't seem to be attracted to you, if that makes sense.
It
That's
makes
how I feel.
perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. And it makes me think that it's almost like, are your beliefs actually your beliefs if you've never questioned them? Or are they just narratives that you've been told? And,
Yeah.
a mate of mine, I remember he said to me a couple of years ago, he had a particularly challenging sort of first 25 years of his life where he was very much, as he would describe, a product of the conditions that he'd lived in and the life he'd experienced. And he realized it wasn't working for him. It was leading him down a dark path. And he said, I asked myself the question, or not even the question, but gave myself the encouragement to disregard everything that I've believed up until this point. It's time to create and form new beliefs. And how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to have new experiences. I'm going to read. I'm going to learn. I'm going to go on the journey of self-mastery and figure this out and form new beliefs that serve me. Form new beliefs that actually hold some evidence in the way that I want to live my life and the way I want to, move through the world. And I wonder, like, for you, you spoke about how adventure can change that. I wonder, like, what are the beliefs and narratives that completely changed for you through the adventures that you went on?
Oh, I mean, there was a myriad, like, with the first series, I just had this innate feeling that as I said before, I wasn't man enough, and I felt like, being a man had so many different facets to it. It wasn't just, can you do something really dangerous? It had all sorts of different forms, and so every adventure that I went on, I think I tried to uncover something new, because I had to make it interesting for myself as well. Like, there's only so many, you know, dangerous rituals you can do before it gets like, you don't have any reason to do them anymore. Like, I had to try to, for me, going and immersing myself in different cultures all around the world where they, men, to be a man took a different mask. Um, that, like, yeah, I guess how do I answer that? Like, I guess
Mm.
I've lost my way, actually. Yeah, ask me the question again. I've totally just lost it.
I guess for me, it's so hard. It would be so hard to draw the actual answers and articulate it. But if you think about the experiences through your adventures, the ones that you've had thus far, what beliefs or narratives that felt so tight and so solid before you went into these adventures or experiences completely changed on the other side of them?
I think, I never felt strong enough. I never felt confident in my own skin. I never felt, I don't know, I guess when I was growing up, a lot of, like, my greater extended family, like, they were all quite solid. There was a lot of solid role models, male role models around me. And I'd always felt like, I don't know, maybe I think it was because I was primarily raised by my mum. I never felt, which was awesome, but I guess I was always looking to download the software as a teenager of, like, just little things about how to walk and talk and converse and all that stuff that you would ordinarily download from having, like, that, male role models always around. And, I love my dad, and he's in TV as well. And I guess I always wanted to be him, especially because he and mum had split up. I was always going, I want, I want, I wanted what I was missing. I wanted to prove myself to him, and so that, I guess so. I was desperate to go on this, journey to try to be comfortable and cool with who I was. So I designed like 12 different extreme manhood rituals around the world. Like I researched, I've read every single edition of National Geographic that had ever been printed. And I found these places on Earth where they still held these rites of passage from ancient times strong, and they were fading, like they were about to, um, like in we all know like Facebook is just like gone, and Instagram now has just gone into like the deepest places on Earth where there's virtually nowhere left where there's no mobile phone reception. So it was my mission to try to find those places on Earth where they still had those rites of passage that I could do, and I was scared of them. Like I'd never like the first adventure I went on for to try to do this series called Boy to Man. I went up to Siberia and I lived with reindeer herders in minus 40 degrees Celsius. And it's like, I guess, becoming a farmer, like a reindeer farmer, but they use reindeer for everything in the coldest conditions you can ever imagine. But I also had to shoot the whole thing and film the whole thing. So it was like a baptism by fire. And I had all these feelings of like, well, what if I had fears of failure? Like everybody said, I had a really good job at the time. I was a journalist. I was a reporter. I was working for Channel 7, and I didn't need to leave that cushy, cozy career, but I decided to chase this dream because I knew it was, I wanted to, I wanted to go and have big life adventures. So I quit my job. I took out a massive loan, bought a huge amount of camera gear, and then took off for like 12 months, which ended up turning into several years of constant travel, doing rites of passage around the world. And yeah, like I guess back to your question of like, well, what did you learn about yourself? Like I guess, yeah, I had narratives that I wasn't good enough, I wasn't strong enough, I wasn't man enough. Um, and I really wanted to feel like, I don't know, just that renewed sense of confidence. I wanted to unlock a strength in me that I knew was somewhere deep inside, but I just didn't know how to do it. And all of these tribal rituals did that for me. They did do it for me. Like I can't pretend like it was that. And I guess it comes from like this age old, you know, um, rites of passage that had been developed for, thousands, tens of thousands of years. It's evolved. Like they must have worked, and they did.
Hmm.
Does that
I
make sense?
wonder, it makes so much sense, mate. And I think it's like, I wonder when you're going into those experiences, because like I said, I watched every episode of that show and I loved it. Like I found it fascinating. And I have two questions that I want to ask you about it. When you actually walked into those tribes for the first time, what is the response? Like, how are you met when you've got camera gear and it's just you and you're clearly a foreigner?
Yeah, yeah. Well, like, look, a little bit of it is TV magic in the sense that it would be really rude to like rock on in without cameras. Well, so it'd be really rude to rock on in with cameras rolling and just expect that they'll take you in. And I what my process would be that I would spend time really researching the areas that I'd want to go, and then I'd send a what's called a fixer, which is like a guide when you're making a TV show, into speak to the people on my behalf. And I'd send them letters or a video saying what I wanted to do and were they interested. Um, and then sometimes I would go in advance and meet them, because often, like with no cameras rolling, because often it would be, I'd be asking to live with people for 30 days or longer. And once you've committed to go and live with a village, there's sort of no turning back. Like you want to hope that the people, like you're going to go on a journey with these people. And I don't have a TV crew. I only traveled with one guy who was my best mate, and he's a video editor. So the tribe that you're living with become the crew, and they're going to go through this process with you. And a lot of people go, oh, well, you know, are you going in there and like, do they even want you there? And they do, because a lot of the time those people, like we're at this tipping point where we're going to lose all these rituals from around the world, and coming in and documenting them is like, it renews their sense of identity. Like they get to, like, especially for the young, because they look at this and they're, oh, there's someone wanting to come in and film us. Why? It's just this, ritual that my dad might have talked about, but I haven't done yet. And then all of a sudden, the whole village is coming together and celebrating these rites of passage that they were almost going to leave behind. With social media coming in all over the world, and everyone wants to dress and be like Ronaldo, and you know, um, be an influencer. So making the documentary with them becomes this incredible process. But like, how do I answer that? So when you're coming in, how do they respond to you? Like, it's it's not an easy thing to like ask somebody, can you live with them for like a month, especially if you're a stranger, and can you go through like their rites of passage, especially as an outsider, as a foreigner. But I guess I just become really vulnerable when I go in there, and I try to be as respectful as I possibly can. And often, like, it's like this thing about this lens is like a passport into other worlds that you can only imagine. And people, I guess, see what you're trying to do, and they see your passion, and then they can see how it will help them too, because they become proud of who they are. So often I found like the reception was really, really positive, and they become, your closest friends. Like, I'm still in touch with everyone that I've filmed with. Um,
Wow.
it's just, yeah, I mean, I wish I could go back, and maybe one day I'll bring my son back. Um, who knows? Sons.
Let me ask you, like, when you're in those experiences, you would have an idea because you've done the research and you've done the prep. But did any of those rituals go like a little bit wrong, and all of a sudden you're questioning whether you're going to be safe and whether you're going to get out the other side of it?
Every time. Yeah, every single time. Like, I started to notice there was always, on every adventure I did in every tribe that I lived with, there was always a point when I felt like I couldn't go on, that everything was a disaster, that nothing was working. I wouldn't be able to do the ritual. Um, that, that there'd be events that would happen where I didn't think I'd walk away with a complete documentary. Um, and without fail, every single time it was always fine. And I'd come out the other side and I'd go, wow, I just overcame something that that I had feared, that I never thought I could do. The people were amazing. Like, we formed the closest bonds that I could ever imagine with people. And it wasn't like, broke down all barriers of language. There was a situation on my first trip to Siberia to live with these reindeer herders, where we actually got left without a guide and a fixer, living in 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole, in this teepee, with 6 people inside. And I had no way to communicate with them except by like a list of things that I would love to, for my mentor, this guy that was like a reindeer herder, to teach me how to do and be like him. And I just point to something every day, and he'd point to, something that he'd like to teach me, whether it not be herding a reindeer or riding a sled like Santa Claus, or having to do a sacrificial kill to eat meat and survive out there. And it ended up being just the most insane bonding experience you can ever imagine. Look, you don't need words to communicate in these places. You find a way to talk, and it's like, it can be life changing. But I remember sitting on this hill on my first trip, going, wow. Like, I walked away from that experience not having a translator. I had walked away with the most insane documentary and this insane life experience, and just went, God, I was lucky to survive that. And then I went on another 12 adventures like that, back to back. And I had disaster after disaster after disaster happen. And every time it was okay. And then I realized there's something that I unlocked in filming this series. And it was that it's almost like we, this is getting esoteric, this is getting weird and esoteric now, but like, I feel like there is a trick to life that we live all the time called the hero's journey. And it's like every film basically follows that formula. Every successful film or book or story that you read follows this formula. It's about a protagonist or protagonists that go into a new world to face a series of challenges on their way to wanting something. And they don't always get what they want, but they always get what they need. And on this journey, where you're out of your comfort zone, you have highs and you have lows like a roller coaster. And then it leads, think about every film you've seen, every story that you've read that's great. It leads to this point where the main character faces adversity and this has to slay the dragon, has to go through an ordeal that they fear. And if you think about again, any movie that you can think of that you've loved. It doesn't matter if it's a relationship movie or like a big high adventure film like Indiana Jones or Star Wars or something. The climax happens right at the end of the movie or at the end of the book. And that's what we're waiting for. And at the end, you emerge, you go back to your old life, your old world, but you're changed. You're 2.0, you're something different because you've got new knowledge. And it's that new knowledge that you want to share with the rest of the world. That's why when you watch a movie at the end, you have that brief moment where you go, everything makes sense for just a moment. And that's what I feel like. That's the reason why this format of storytelling resonates so hard with us. That's why it works. That's why we watch movies and read books and go to plays, and because we get that knowledge at the end, the boon, the special wisdom that person has experienced by going on the adventure in the first place. And as I went on all these different adventures, I realized that actually that's what. As I went on all these adventures, I realized that it innately, when you put yourself out of your comfort zone to go and do something extraordinary, it always follows that format. And if you're just cool with life's challenges and you're choosing them, then it makes it a whole lot easier.
It's such a great point, isn't it? Like,
I hope that makes sense.
Mate, it strikes such a chord because, I was just thinking as you said that, like you think about, go on, sorry.
Well, because the thing is, it mimics our own life, because the reason I think the hero's journey, we respond to it so much is because we get born into this world and it's a foreign alien place and you have to go on the roller coaster of life. And as, what we could be, which is eternal souls, who knows what we are, but like ultimately we have to face death. And at that point, on the other side, you're going to, if you believe in this, if you're not an atheist, you're going to emerge with knowledge, like wisdom that you've got from this game called life. And so I think what we all miss, like, certainly not all of us, but like, I feel like what I miss a lot is that, we get sucked so much into the I guess the race of like just being alive and, just having to survive, that we forget that, we're essentially on that roller coaster. We're in our own movie. Yeah. And I guess I try to remind myself as much as I can just to take stock and go, don't take life too seriously. All, the good and the bad is all part of it. And I noticed that when I was making my own documentaries, that they all followed this format where every time I deliberately put myself into a new environment to go and face a new challenge, that the universe would almost conspire to make that hero's journey happen every time, in the most magical way I could ever have imagined. And so, yeah, I guess I get off on choosing those. I'd rather choose my challenges than have them just be attracted to me by sitting back and doing something like working a job that I'm not passionate about. Because I feel like that's when, life has a knack of sort of throwing curveballs at you. So you get, life lessons no matter what. Hope that makes sense again.
Mate, it certainly does. I remember through the first marathon, one of my best mates who's a regular on the podcast, he kept saying, we're choosing this suffering. This is chosen suffering. Like, let's lean into this. This is chosen suffering. And I remember how much sense that made. Like there were factors leading up to that point that certainly weren't chosen, like challenges with my health and my lungs bleeding. And there were all of these chosen efforts to challenge myself that made me far more resilient and anti-fragile towards the unchosen stuff. It's why I think in the modern day we're seeing so many people go and run across the country or challenge themselves in the most insane way that we can physically imagine to experience that hero's journey and that growth and that new knowledge and understanding. It's why I remember, to use an Australian example, Ned Brockman. I remember when he went on his run across the country, I watched this guy's movements after he'd completed it, and he was starting to articulate it and talk about his feelings and the lessons he learnt along the way. And it was almost like this guy had aged in like mentally and learnt 20 years of lessons in the space of a couple months.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's because the depth of challenge gives you the greatest depth of understanding. And, it's almost like you need that suffering and you need that darkness to really understand and know the light
Yeah.
of life. And think that we're all in some way, shape, or form either choosing to do that in ways that positively affect us, or some people in ways that negatively affect them. Like I think about the group of people who continue to go back to their ex-partner that they totally don't work with and that there's absolutely no positive in that relationship because they want to feel some kind of struggle and understand and be able to grapple with life. And I think about all the positive examples of stepping into challenge and stepping into adventure. And like one of those in life is stepping into marriage, right?
Yep.
And you and your partner have gone on that journey with that series, and marriage is like the ultimate reflection of you. I remember like I'd never been in a long-term committed relationship before I met Soph. I'd never found somebody that I was willing to fully commit to that kind of depth of relationship with. And I remember like our first year in relationship, there were plenty of challenges in my life that come up that we were now addressing together. And a lot of those challenges were around my work where it wasn't happening the way I had pictured it and dreamt of it happening. And that meant there were financial challenges, and it meant that there were times where it was hard to keep a roof over the head. And we handled those challenges so well as a couple. But I remember for me, it was almost like every time I looked at her and I felt a frustration for why my work wasn't going the way I wanted it to, or the fact that we had no money and I didn't know how we we're going to get groceries that week, my actions were immediately sort of like reflecting back on me. And it's like, okay, you can't just be a cranky piece of shit like you could if you're at home by yourself, because you have somebody who will be affected by this. And so like relationship and partnership is this ultimate lesson and test all the time. I wonder, when you guys went on, your series and went through the rituals of marriage, what did you learn about relationship and partnership? And, what were the lessons that you guys learned together?
I think like ultimately what we learned by putting ourselves through all these, crazy marriage rituals around the world was that, I guess our relationship went to such extreme highs and extreme lows that I realized that, I've got a cough actually. We realized that, to love the challenge and like the support that we were giving each other equally. Like, I think about marriage, we learned that before we went on that adventure, I think we never had an argument. We hadn't then all of a sudden we were traveling together. But we were also making a TV show, and it happened to be for Netflix. So it was like the stakes were high. I felt as a filmmaker that we couldn't come back unless we had a TV show and it was shot beautifully and all the rest of it. And PJ really wanted me to be present and still have that experience as well. And I was very much, I guess I felt a lot of pressure, and we both felt a lot of pressure to survive this experience and make it legitimate and get a, you know, make it authentic. So it wasn't a stunt. And like it quickly didn't become a stunt because all of a sudden it was really real. We were in real situations in wild places all over the world. And we had no path except for to keep going right until the very end. And at the end, what we learned about marriage was that, like, people have this fantasy that everything should always be good all the time and that our relationship should be perfect and that you shouldn't argue and you shouldn't, like it should just be kind of like Ken and Barbie. And it's not that. Like life's imperfect. It's like appreciating the challenge and growing out of that. You don't grow unless you go through a challenge. If you think about it, you don't. You like happiness. There's a saying that like happiness writes in white ink on a white page because there's no story. There's nothing there, right? So like we learned to just realize that actually a healthy partnership is always going to be like, it's not always going to be perfect all the time. There's going to be really hard times, and we learned to move past all of these. I guess we tried to cram in like a couple of decades of things we would have thought about or had to overcome as a couple in 12 months. In one, it ended up being 8 trips, but it was one extreme engagement. So that really set us up because we pushed ourselves into adversity and then popped out the other side much, much, much stronger for it. And as a result, having kids is a breeze compared to like what it would have been if we'd been still struggling like with our own, normal relationship issues while also trying to raise a couple of kids.
Mate, I love that. What an incredible experience for you both. But I wonder, like right now, if you think about the present, I know you're a week away from having your second child. God willing, it's healthy and an amazing experience for you both. I wonder right now, though, if you think about some of the challenges that you're feeling at the moment, is there anything that comes to the surface as a challenge you're really grappling with right now or a feeling you're trying to understand?
Yeah, like I think because I traveled so much and then traveled with PJ, my partner, so much before having children, we really tasted a way of living where people who didn't have all that much still were very, very happy in these really remote places around the world. And I often would ask myself, like, at the end of the day, when we've all lived our own, at the end of our lives, my life and the people I was living with, who would be happier? Like, it's because it's an awkward position because you can go out. I could always come home and I could experience the internet and know what's happening around the world, and go and see movies and go and, have life's luxuries. But then does that make you any happier than the person that's living on an atoll in Papua New Guinea somewhere with nothing, but they've got everything. They've got happiness and family and laughter and, fresh food and beautiful scenery, and they don't have electricity. And that, so I'd often like measure that up. And so now, because we've lived with so many remote communities with people that are extremely happy and they don't have that much, we're often asking ourselves, well, now we're living in we live a very suburban life. And it's actually quite brave to think about giving it all up to go and try to give our kids what we've experienced, which is living with not much, but having a life packed full of adventures in beautiful places around the world instead. Because you get this house and you get all your stuff and you have all this material things, and then you're like, oh, but I've got to give up all of that to go away and try to live an alternate existence. And I often think, God, do we now? We've got all this, we've got a suburban life. What would it take to give it all up and take our kids and live the life less traveled? I don't know. Like, I mean, I'm hoping that we do have the courage to do that. And I'm envious now, even though we've done it before, we haven't done it with kids. And so like now that's the big question. Can we and should we do that? And how soon should we do that? Yeah.
Do you have any friends or any examples of people who are doing that with a family?
No. No, I
That's
don't.
where it's hard.
Yeah.
That's where it's really hard when you don't have tangible examples of how that can work. And I
Yeah.
think that is part of the challenge. And it's part of the reason why, in many regards, in the Western world, we all live such similar lives. You know, like if you think about I say quote unquote ordinary person because everyone's different, but most people have a similar tone to their day where they wake up, go to a job in an office from 9 to 5. They might get a half-hour lunch break. They have some small talk. They go home after 5 o'clock. Usually there's a transit period before work and after work where they listen to the same thing on the radio, or they might listen to a podcast or some songs, and they go home and they watch TV and they're with their family or their partner if they're lucky enough to have them. And then they go to bed and wake up and do the same thing, 5 or 6 days a week. And I just wonder, like, when you see so many people around you who are living that same life and everyone's talking about what they seen on Married at First Sight the night before, or, what life is like for them, it almost reaffirms that, okay, well, this is normal. And it's like, how do you break the mold of that experience and do something different? And it's like, even if you arrive back at the conclusion that that's the life you like, that's okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
But if you've never had any different kind of experience, you don't know what's right for you. I remember, what was life-changing for me, Tim? At the age of 24, I read the book The Alchemist.
Yeah.
And just this idea of going on the adventure of your life and figuring out what your purpose, or as they say in the book, personal legend is, and being okay with the ups and downs, like we said, that hero's journey, to figure out in the end that really for me, the meaning of the book was the treasure is in the experience of it all.
Yeah.
That
100%.
we're completely void of any need for an outcome, but rather like the texture of the experience and the joyful moments, the challenges, the people you meet along the way. That is the treasure. And that changed my view on everything. It encouraged me to go and do something different. And my life has a corporate feel to it at the moment. I'm in an apartment and it's pretty nice, and I've got plantation shutters on the windows, and there are certain luxuries here that you don't get in third world countries. But I have different views on what I want for the future, and I'm excited about the fact that you get to live a life by design.
Yeah.
Whether you know that or not.
Yeah. 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 100%. I mean, like, and the thing is, I think often, like I've in the past, I've tried not to lose track of the idea that, we're only, it sounds so cliche, but it's so true. We're only here, we're born onto this earth for such a short period of time. And it's not that big now because we can travel to these places, but there's so much to explore. There's so much to experience. And it's like, I guess if it is a video game of some description, why wouldn't you want to go and just milk every little bit that you can out of it? And I know that a lot of people can't afford to do that. And that's a constant issue. It's a constant issue. Even like it's a constant issue for us. Like if we could afford it, we'd of course travel the world continuously. And that's the reason I became a documentary filmmaker, is because I wanted to earn a living doing what I love while having these like rich life experiences. But yeah, you're totally right. It's like about enjoying that journey of it. And I just think we should be trying to maximize it as much as we can. I say that, and then as I'm saying that, I'm like, yeah, but what about the guy, like my friends that are living like on remote atolls in Papua New Guinea that don't get to travel, and they're still happy at the end of the day. Yeah, I don't know. This
I
is
think
it.
you only know what you know too. And, it's the cliche of you hear the rich man say that money won't make you happy. And you go, yeah, All right, bud, easy for you to say,
Yeah.
you know, but they can truly speak to it because they're there. Like only when you've experienced something and you've lived it can you speak to what it feels like on the other side. It's why when, I grew up with the dream of wanting to be the next Brad Fittler. Well, at first it was Batman. I realized that wasn't going to happen. And then it was like, I want to be a great rugby league player. And because of liver disease, I had to quit contact sport and leave that dream behind. And now I have the pleasure of two of my best mates play rugby league professionally. And I sit down and I speak to them about the experience. And they're like, and I recently just had them both on the podcast and I asked them, what's different about the reality you experience right now to what you dreamed of it being when you were a child? And they're like, it's such a great question. You probably don't appreciate it enough because you're just in it and you don't really reflect. And you're just like, all right, one achievement, what's the next? Made this rep team. Can I make the next one? It's such a challenge because until you're in that experience, you can't speak to it. And
Yeah.
so, like I say that I want to be a podcaster and I'd love to do more of this full time where it provides me with a living that I can support a family on and I get to have these in-depth conversations and be curious all the time. I really don't know what that's going to be like until one day I have the blessing of a crew around me and a producer and great cameras and all of a sudden I'm sitting in front of, people consistently and that's how I pay my bills. Like I only hope it's what I dream it to be, but I don't think that's any reason not to go and try and experience it.
But if you were to get that given to you without going through any adversity and struggle, you wouldn't have the the character and the questions and the insights to ask you to attract the hosts. Like,
I agree.
or do
I
you know?
agree.
So I don't know. Like, if it was given to you on a silver platter, it wouldn't mean anything.
Mate, I completely agree with you. And that's why, and maybe this is convenient thinking, but that's why I say, hey, lucky it hasn't worked out yet
Yeah,
because it's given
it
me,
has
and
worked out. I mean, it's
it
worked.
has.
And you don't actually also know, I guess, what even working as a real estate agent will give you in that sense, like with the people that you speak to. Like, what lessons do you learn from like your real estate job that you bring into the podcast? They've got to be some. Like, I guess it's like having the front to be able to speak to people, anyone, to be able to like. I mean, there must be some things that you get from being a real estate agent that you take into the podcast.
Probably the biggest reminder all the time is
Doing what you love.
that, but also just every day in real estate, you're tested by your integrity. And I'm a big character and integrity guy. And it would be so much easier in the short term to walk into somebody's home and say, hey, I think it's worth this very shiny figure so that they commit to a sale and then you've got them on the market. And what some real estate gurus and trainers will tell you is then basically beat them down over price so you get a sale and you condition them to the market. That just doesn't sit with me at all. And so every day I choose to go, I'm going to handle this with integrity and be honest and be real with people and tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And if that means that we don't get to do business, well, I can put my head on the pillow and know that I'm an honest man and get good sleep that night. And it might mean that I miss out on another 2 or 3 commissions a month. And it might mean that I never am a big real estate agent by financial means or any other regard, but it means that I get to respect the man that I see in the mirror. And I think that relates to any area of life. It's the same with a podcast. I could get people on the podcast who I know are going to create clickbait material online, and we could say things that just cause outrage or, for any specific purpose, grab attention and bring numbers to the podcast. But do I love the product that I'm putting out? Am I doing it for the reason that I started out doing it, which was to have conversations and be curious and learn from people and try to uplift and inspire others? Like, no, I've lost my integrity. And that's a challenge for everyone in their careers and in the way that they live their lives. You can lie to people so that they think you're interesting and want to be your friends, but then do you have the depth of connection in relationships that you sought out to have in the first place? No. So it's, you certainly can learn something from every area of life. But I
Even
think
if
for
you
me,
can't
it's
see it, even if you can't see it at the time, right? Because you might not even know like how it's helping you right now. Yeah.
mate, 100%. And so, yeah, you just learn to be, well, I'm learning, and it's a challenge to be accepting of where things are at the present, and just trust that they'll move in the direction that is favourable,
Yeah.
you know. But mate, I've loved chatting to you. I'm conscious of our time, and I just want to see if there's anything else that you want to speak about before we finish up, or anything right now that's exciting you that you'd love the listeners to know about.
Um, I think what I've got out of even this conversation is, yeah, just this reminder that, like, and we all need it. It's just to be as present as you possibly can be, and and understanding and remembering that actually, no matter what you're going through in life, all the challenges are all part of that journey, and it's what makes it rich. It's it, you know, we're entering this new world in the next couple of years with AI starting to take hold. And every time I mention this, my wife sort of rolls her eyes, and she'll be rolling her eyes right now if she's listening. Um, where we could be entering an age of abundance where AI is going to be solving a lot of problems for us, um, overtaking all the menial tasks and taking a lot of jobs away from people because it's easier to use, AI and ChatGPT and the rafts of other AIs models that are coming out to just take away a lot of what people do for a living. And it's funny, like I feel like anyway, as life will be getting easier in some fronts, when you've got everything at your disposal, and say if AI fixes, food, and it fixes, because it'll work out how to grow abundant food, and solves things like power, and, you know, we don't have to work as hard anymore. Um, I think it's going to cause like this problem where you really have to like reassess what your purpose is. Um, and if you're bored and you don't have anything to do, I don't want to get too esoteric about this. What do you do? Like I guess you end up playing, people will end up playing video games for challenge. And those video games, you want to play something that's pretty bloody challenging because it's fun. And I think we forget that actually, well, we're living life and it's challenging, but that's kind of what also makes it fun. If it wasn't challenging and it wasn't, like a big giant jigsaw puzzle that we needed to try to work out, this whole thing, like this whole existence, wouldn't be like, wouldn't really be worth it. Like it's all about, I feel like the biggest lessons I've learned are all about self-actualization, realizing who you are. And like that, every challenge that we go through on that hero's journey of life is about like peeling off a layer of the onion to find out who we are, like in ourselves and experiencing ourselves for, our true self. That sounds, it sounds like esoteric and wanky, but I truly feel like that. So yeah, I mean, I'd encourage anyone to head out and go on an adventure, but make sure it's to do something personal, to overcome something personal, because yeah, like you only, yeah, as I said before, like you only grow from adversity. You don't grow from like being happy all the time. That's
Go
a
on the
really,
adventure of your
that,
life, hey?
yeah, that's a really shit thing to say. Like I'm not being very inspiring there, but
No, you are being inspiring, and it's very true. It's an incredible reminder to go on the adventure of your life, to live, and to see what you can learn.
yeah, I mean, look, I think everybody wants to do something extraordinary. Like it, everyone has that, like feeling deep down, don't we? Like to do something to overcome something that you're scared of and go on the adventure of a lifetime, because it's so exciting, stepping into
Mate,
the unknown. And and
it's
I
like we exist on a rock that floats around in space, and we don't know how we're here and we can't figure it out, if that's not extraordinary enough and it doesn't inspire you that you could achieve anything and that you yourself are extraordinary and could go and challenge yourself and have new experiences and, continue to add to the fabric of your story and experience whatever this is that we're in. Like, what will?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Mate, you're a legend. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and I'm going to make sure that everywhere that everybody can find you, we'll link the series in the show note. We'll link you on social media. But mate, I'm excited to keep riffing with you as life goes on, and to keep checking in and catching up to have these conversations, because it's been bloody fun and very thought provoking.
Me too, mate. It's been an absolute delight, and you're such an inspiring guy. It's my honour to speak to you.
Mate, thank you. You're too kind. Cheers, Tim.
Cheers, mate.